They do not hate you for the reasons they give. They may say it is your attitude, your confidence, your distance, your silence. But beneath the words they choose, beneath the stories they tell themselves, something far deeper is moving. They hate you because you remind them of something they have abandoned within themselves. Not consciously, not deliberately, but inevitably. When a human being encounters someone who lives closer to their inner truth, something ancient is stirred. A pressure builds in the psyche, a quiet discomfort, a tension that demands release. And because facing oneself is far more painful than judging another, the mind chooses the easier path. Carl Jung understood this with unsettling clarity. He saw that much of what we call hatred is not directed outward at all. It is an inward conflict displaced onto another human being, a psychological defense, a mirror turned away. When someone lives authentically, when they think independently, refuse to conform, or walk a path of inner depth, they become a mirror. And mirrors are dangerous things, because mirrors do not lie. The hatred that rises in others is rarely about you as a person. It is about what your existence forces them to feel. You awaken questions they have learned to silence, longings they have buried, courage they once felt and then betrayed. To see you is to remember themselves before compromise, and memory can be unbearable. Jung called this mechanism projection. The psyche cannot tolerate certain truths about itself, so it casts them outward, locating them in another. The anger, the envy, the sense of inferiority, all finds a target. You become the screen upon which their unconscious conflict is projected. This is why the hostility often feels irrational, why it comes without warning, why it persists even when you have done nothing wrong. The unconscious does not care about fairness. It cares about balance. And when someone lives out alignment with their own soul, the psyche seeks relief wherever it can find it. Often, it finds it in you. What unsettles people most is not arrogance or power. It is inner freedom. Someone who does not require permission to exist. Someone who does not beg for validation. Someone who does not betray themselves to belong. Such a person threatens the fragile agreements that hold many lives together. Most people are bound by invisible contracts. Be like us. Do not go too far. Do not see too much. Do not remind us of what we lost. When you violate these contracts simply by being yourself, resentment grows. They may not even know why they dislike you. They may invent reasons, criticisms, moral justifications. But the emotional charge gives them away. Strong emotions without clear cause always point to the unconscious. Jung warned that the greatest danger is not being hated. It is being unconscious of why. Because if you internalize their projections, you may begin to doubt yourself, to shrink, to dim your light, to carry shame that was never yours. This is how individuation is sabotaged, not by external attack, but by internal confusion. The individuation process, Jung taught, is a journey of becoming who you truly are rather than who the world demands you be. And this journey is inherently lonely, not because you're flawed, but because you are no longer pretending. When you stop performing, those still performing feel exposed. When you stop lying to yourself, those who depend on self-deception feel judged. Even if you say nothing, your silence becomes an accusation. Your presence becomes an interruption. And so hostility emerges. But to understand this is to reclaim your power. Because once you see that their hatred is not about you, you stop fighting shadows. You stop defending yourself against ghosts. You stop trying to be understood by those who are not listening to you, but to their own fear. Jung believed that every individual who dares to individuate pays a price. The price is misunderstanding, isolation, resistance, but the alternative is far worse. To abandon your inner truth in order to be liked is to become inwardly divided, and nothing produces bitterness faster than a life lived against the soul. Those who hate you for being yourself are not strong. They are terrified of the same journey you have already begun. And this is only the beginning. Jung taught that every human being carries a shadow, not evil in the dramatic sense, but everything we have denied, repressed, or disowned in order to survive. The shadow forms early. When a child learns that certain traits are unacceptable, anger, sensitivity, ambition, independence, The psyche does not destroy them. It hides them, buries them, pushes them into the dark. What is pushed into the shadow does not disappear. It waits, and one day it looks for a face. This is where hatred begins. When someone encounters a person who openly lives traits they themselves had to repress, the shadow is activated. The psyche experiences this as threat, not intellectual threat, but existential danger, because your freedom exposes their imprisonment. Your honesty exposes their compromise. Your courage exposes their fear. But the ego cannot admit this. To do so would require pain, responsibility, and transformation. So the mind reaches for defense. Projection. The shadow is cast outward and attached to you. Suddenly you are arrogant. You are selfish. You are dangerous. You think you are better than others. Notice the pattern. The accusations are rarely specific. They are emotional, charged, vague, moralized. Jung observed that the shadow often disguises itself as moral outrage. People convince themselves they are righteous, principled, or virtuous, when in reality they are discharging envy. Envy is one of the most taboo emotions. Almost no one admits to it consciously, and yet it shapes societies, relationships, and entire moral systems. When people cannot become what they admire, they begin to despise it. But envy alone is not enough. It must be justified. So the psyche constructs a story. You are too intense. You think too deeply. You don't fit in. You make others uncomfortable. What they mean is simpler. You make me feel something I don't want to feel. Jung warned that the most dangerous people are not those who know they have a shadow, but those who believe they do not. These individuals are convinced of their own goodness, their own correctness, and because they cannot see their darkness, they must locate it elsewhere. They become hunters of shadows, and often they hunt those who are most conscious. You may notice that the more self-aware you become, the more subtle the hostility grows. It is no longer open aggression. It becomes passive, ironic, polite, smiling, but it never disappears. Because the unconscious does not forget. It keeps score. Another painful truth Jung uncovered is this. Kindness does not protect you from projection. In fact, it can intensify it. Why? Because when you are kind without submission, compassionate without weakness, generous without self-erasure, you violate expectations. Many people expect kindness to come with compliance. When it doesn't, confusion arises. You become difficult to categorize. And what cannot be categorized becomes threatening. This is why people often react more harshly to quiet strength than to loud dominance. Loud dominance fits an archetype. Quiet strength does not. It bypasses their defenses. It reaches something raw. Jung believed that unconscious people are instinctively hostile toward individuation. Not because they are evil, but because individuation destabilizes the collective norms that keep them psychologically safe. Most societies reward sameness, agreement, predictability. Individuation disrupts this. When you individuate, you stop playing certain roles. You stop reinforcing certain illusions. You stop validating certain lies. And those who depend on these structures feel attacked, even though no attack has occurred. This is why hatred often intensifies when you withdraw rather than confront. Silence leaves space. Space invites reflection. Reflection awakens discomfort. Your refusal to explain yourself deprives them of narrative control. And narrative control is power. Jung emphasized that the psyche prefers familiar suffering to unfamiliar truth. Many people would rather live with resentment than risk transformation. So instead of asking, why does this person bother me so deeply? They ask, what is wrong with them? This question protects the ego, but it destroys the soul. Over time, repeated projection hardens into identity. People convince themselves they truly despise you. They rewrite history. They exaggerate flaws. They recruit allies. This creates a shared shadow, a collective justification. And now the hatred feels righteous. At this stage, reason no longer matters. Explanation only feeds a projection. Defense only confirms guilt. This is why Jung advised extreme caution when engaging unconscious hostility. You are not arguing with logic. You are confronting someone else's denied self, and that self will not surrender easily. Understanding this does not make the experience painless, but it makes it meaningful. It allows you to stop asking, "What did I do wrong?" and begin asking, "What did my existence awaken?" The answer is rarely flattering, but it is freeing, because once you see the mechanism, you stop absorbing the poison. You stop carrying emotions that were never yours. You let them return to their source. And this prepares you for the next stage, the most difficult one, remaining whole without becoming bitter. As consciousness deepens, something subtle begins to happen. Your world grows quieter, not because people disappear physically, but because fewer people can meet you where you now stand. Jung was clear about this, though he rarely softened the truth. Individuation is not a path that leads toward the crowd. It leads inward, an inward journey separate, not out of superiority, not out of rejection, but out of divergence. When you begin to live from your inner center rather than external approval, your values shift, your tolerances change, your conversations deepen, or end. Many relationships exist not because of genuine connection, but because of shared avoidance, shared denial, shared distraction. When you stop avoiding yourself, those bonds loosen. This is one of the great unspoken pains of awakening. Not the hatred of others, but the quiet loss of belonging. And this loss can tempt you toward bitterness. Jung warned that bitterness is a shadow of insight. When someone sees too much without integrating compassion, their wisdom curdles into contempt. They begin to look down rather than look through. This is a danger. The psyche, wounded by rejection and misunderstanding, seeks armor. It hardens. It builds walls. It turns pain into identity. But armor, once worn too long, becomes a prison. The challenge is not simply to survive hostility, but to remain human in the face of it. You may feel the urge to withdraw completely, to become cold, to say, "If this is how people are, I want no part of them." This impulse is understandable, but Jung would say it is incomplete, because individuation is not separation from humanity. It is conscious relationship with it. You are not meant to escape the world. You are meant to meet it without losing yourself. This requires a delicate balance, to be open without being naive, to be discerning without becoming cynical, to be alone without becoming isolated. Jung believed that the individuated person often lives at the edge of society, not fully inside, not fully outside, close enough to observe, distant enough to remain free. This position is uncomfortable. You will see patterns others deny. You will sense motivations others cannot admit. You will feel tensions long before they surface. And because you see, you will be seen. Not always kindly, but awareness brings responsibility. If you allow resentment to take root, you risk becoming what you despise. The shadow does not disappear simply because you understand it. It waits for new opportunities. This is why Jung insisted that self-knowledge must be accompanied by humility. The more you see, the more careful you must become. Not everyone who dislikes you is projecting. Some people simply do not resonate with you, and that is natural. But when hostility is disproportionate, obsessive, or moralized, it reveals something deeper. Your task is not to correct it. Your task is to not internalize it. The psyche grows strongest not by winning battles, but by choosing which battles are real. Many conflicts are invitations to lose energy. The unconscious feeds on reaction. When you stop reacting, the projection loses its anchor. This does not mean passivity. It means clarity. Jung spoke often about the importance of boundaries, not physical, but psychological. A boundary is not a wall. It is a limit of responsibility. You are not responsible for how others manage their inner conflicts. You are responsible for how you carry yourself through them. The individuated person learns when to speak and when to remain silent, when to engage and when to withdraw, when to confront and when to let reality do the work, because reality always does. Over time, those who project will encounter themselves again, through someone else, some other situation, some unavoidable reckoning. You do not need to be the instrument of their awakening. You only need to protect your own. This is where solitude becomes essential. Solitude is not loneliness. It is the space in which the psyche reorganizes itself. It is where the noise of projection fades and the inner voice becomes audible again. Jung valued solitude deeply. He retreated often, not to escape the world, but to metabolize it. Without solitude, the psyche becomes saturated, overexposed, confused. In solitude, you remember who you are beneath the reactions of others, and this remembrance restores balance. You begin to see hostility not as a verdict, but as a symptom, not as truth, but as information. You stop asking, "Why do they hate me?" and begin asking, "What does this reveal about the human psyche?" This shift is crucial, because once curiosity replaces self-doubt, you are no longer wounded in the same way. You are learning, and learning transforms pain into insight. But the journey is not over yet. There's a deeper layer still, the one that explains why some people will never forgive you for becoming yourself. There is an unspoken agreement that governs most human relationships. It is never written. It is rarely acknowledged, but it is deeply enforced. The agreement is simple. Do not remind me of who I could have been. From childhood onward, people make compromises with life. Some are necessary. Many are unconscious. Dreams are postponed. Instincts are muted. Curiosity is traded for security. Over time, these compromises harden into identity. I am just being realistic. This is how the world works. It's too late now. These phrases sound rational, but psychologically, they function as seals, closing doors the soul once wanted to open. When you live authentically, you break the seal. Without saying a word, you demonstrate that another way of being is possible, that life does not have to be entirely resigned, dulled, or obedient. And this is where resentment begins to deepen. Because for those who have convinced themselves there was no choice, your existence feels like an accusation. Jung understood that conformity is not merely social, it is psychological. People bind themselves to collective identities not only to belong, but to avoid responsibility for their own unlived lives. If everyone is asleep, no one feels guilty for dreaming. If everyone is numb, no one has to feel grief. But when one person wakes up, the dream is disturbed. Your authenticity does not merely differentiate you. It destabilizes the fragile equilibrium that allows others to live without confronting themselves. This is why people often react with subtle hostility rather than open curiosity. Curiosity would require self-examination. Hostility requires nothing. You may notice this especially when you refuse certain rituals of conformity, complaining, gossiping, posturing, performative outrage. When you opt out, you create silence, and silence invites reflection. Reflection is dangerous. So the psyche moves to eliminate the disturbance. Sometimes this takes the form of ridicule, sometimes exclusion, sometimes moral criticism, sometimes a quiet withdrawal of warmth. The message is the same. Return to the role. Reassure us. Make us comfortable again. Jung noted that societies often punish those who individuate not because they are wrong, but because they are inconvenient. The individual who thinks independently exposes the artificial nature of group beliefs. The individual who lives deliberately exposes the automatic nature of others' lives. And this exposure feels like betrayal. You think you're better than us. This accusation reveals the core wound. It is not about superiority. It is about separation. When you individuate, you leave the psychic herd. Not physically, but internally. You stop defining yourself primarily through external validation. And for those who rely on collective identity to stabilize their sense of self, this departure feels like abandonment. They may not say it. They may not even know it. But unconsciously, they experience your growth as loss. Jung emphasized that much of what we call loyalty is actually mutual repression. I will not change if you will not change. When one person breaks this pact, the other feels betrayed, even if the pact was never spoken. This is why growth can fracture long-standing relationships, not because love was absent, but because identity was conditional. Conditional on sameness, conditional on stagnation, conditional on silence. Your refusal to remain small breaks the spell, and spells do not break gently. Another uncomfortable truth Jung explored is that success, inner or outer, often intensifies resentment rather than admiration, especially when success is achieved without sacrificing integrity. People can forgive failure, They can even forgive, struggle. But authenticity combined with self-possession is difficult to forgive because it removes excuses. If you can live differently, then perhaps they could have too. And this thought is unbearable. So the psyche finds relief in judgment. They scrutinize your flaws. They exaggerate your mistakes. They reduce your complexity to caricature. This is not analysis. It is defense. Jung warned that the more unconscious a person is, the more they moralize. Morality becomes a weapon used to justify inner conflict. They do not say, I feel threatened. They say, you are wrong. They do not say, I feel inferior. They say, you are arrogant. They do not say, I am afraid. They say, you are dangerous. Understanding this does not mean you are immune to pain. Rejection still hurts. Misunderstanding still wounds. But it prevents the deepest injury, the belief that you must shrink to survive. You do not. The cost of authenticity is real. But so is the cost of betrayal of the self. Jung believed that every individual must eventually choose between belonging and becoming. You can balance the two for a time, but when the call of the self grows strong, compromise becomes suffering. This is when hatred from others often peaks, not because you're doing something wrong, but because you are doing something irreversible. You are no longer available for the old agreements, and the unconscious knows it. There comes a point in the individuation process where understanding is no longer enough. Insight alone does not protect you. Awareness alone does not anchor you. What is required now is inner authority. Jung believed that the greatest danger for a conscious individual is not hostility from others, but the slow erosion of confidence that comes from repeated misunderstanding. When projection meets doubt, the psyche weakens. This is why many people begin the journey inward, but do not finish it. They wake up, but they do not root themselves. Inner authority is not dominance. It is not aggression. It is not the need to convince or correct. It is the quiet certainty that comes from alignment with the self. When you act from this place, something changes. The projections of others still occur, but they no longer penetrate, because you are no longer negotiating your reality with the external world. Jung taught that the self is the regulating center of the psyche. When the ego aligns with it, life gains an internal compass. You no longer need constant feedback. To know who you are, this does not make you rigid. It makes you stable. Stability is threatening to unstable systems. This is why some people intensify their hostility when they sense you are no longer affected. They escalate emotionally, hoping to provoke reaction. Reaction feeds projection. Calm dissolves it. When you do not respond as expected, when you do not defend, explain, or retaliate, you interrupt the unconscious cycle. The shadow has nowhere to land. This is not passivity. It is mastery. Jung warned that many people confuse self-protection with withdrawal. They isolate themselves completely, believing this will keep them safe. But psychic health requires engagement, just not indiscriminate exposure. Psychological protection means choosing where you invest energy. Not every comment deserves a response. Not every opinion deserves consideration. Not every misunderstanding deserves correction. Your time, attention, and emotional energy are finite. Where you place them shapes your inner world. The individuated person becomes selective, not out of arrogance, but out of respect for their own psyche. You begin to sense when an interaction is an exchange, and when it is an extraction. Extraction leave you depleted. Exchange leave you clarified. This discernment is crucial because unconscious hostility is contagious. If you absorb it long enough, you risk carrying it forward, projecting it onto others in turn. Jung insisted that whatever is not made conscious is lived out compulsively. You do not want to become a vessel for someone else's unresolved shadow. This is why inner authority must be paired with compassion. But compassion with boundaries. You can understand without absorbing. You can empathize without agreeing. You can see the wound without stepping into it. One of Jung's most subtle insights was that maturity is not the absence of conflict. It is a capacity to hold tension without collapse. You will still encounter resentment. You will still be misunderstood. You will still feel moments of isolation. But these experiences no longer define you. They pass through you rather than shaping you. This is the mark of psychological adulthood. At this stage, something surprising often happens. The hatred loses its intensity, not because others have changed, but because you have. Projection requires participation. It needs emotional hooks. When those hooks are gone, the unconscious grows bored. Some people will drift away. Some will soften. Some will turn their projections elsewhere. This is not your concern. Your concern is remaining aligned. Jung believed that life becomes simpler, but not easier, when lived from self. Decisions are clearer. Values are non-negotiable. Integrity replaces anxiety. You stop asking, how am I being perceived? And begin asking, am I being true? This shift is revolutionary because it removes you from the psychological economy of approval and rejection. You are no longer trading pieces of yourself for acceptance. And this is precisely why your presence becomes unsettling to some. You cannot be controlled by praise. You cannot be punished by disapproval. You are internally referenced. This is freedom. But freedom, Jung warned, is responsibility. Without external rules to hide behind, you must answer to yourself. You must confront your own shadow continuously. You must remain vigilant against superiority. You must resist the temptation to harden. The danger at this stage is subtle inflation, the belief that because you see more, you are more. Jung cautioned strongly against this. The individuated person is not above humanity, but deeper within it. True authority does not elevate you above others. It roots you more firmly in reality. You see suffering more clearly. You see fear more compassionately. You see hostility as pain in disguise. And because you see it, you do not need to fight it. You simply refuse to carry it. This refusal is not loud. It is quiet, steady, unyielding, and it changes everything. There is a quiet moment that arrives when you finally understand what has been happening all along, not intellectually, not philosophically, but existentially. You realize that the hatred, the resistance, the subtle hostility you encountered was never meant to stop you. It was meant to shape you. Jung believed that the psyche evolves through tension. Without resistance, consciousness stagnates. Without friction, identity remains borrowed rather than earned. What opposed you did not destroy you. It clarified you. Each misunderstanding forced you to listen more closely to your inner voice. Each rejection stripped away another layer of false identity. Each projection revealed what you were not, and slowly, something solid formed. Not arrogance, not bitterness, but gravity. You no longer rush to explain yourself. You no longer feel compelled to be liked. You no longer measure your worth by reaction. You have crossed a threshold. Jung would say that this is the moment when the ego begins to serve the self rather than rule it. Life is no longer a performance. It becomes a dialogue with something deeper. From this place, hatred loses its personal sting. You still notice it, but you do not personalize it. You understand its origin. You recognize its function. It is a cry of an unconscious psyche encountering truth too abruptly. This understanding does not excuse cruelty, but it frees you from confusion. You stop asking why they hate you. You stop asking how to fix it. You stop asking what you should change. Instead, you ask one question only. Am I aligned with myself? If the answer is yes, you remain still. This stillness is not weakness. It is the stillness of a rooted tree in a storm. The wind may howl, branches may sway, but the roots hold. Jung often returned to the image of the tree as a symbol of individuation. Its roots descend into darkness. Its branches reach toward light. Both are necessary. Those who live only on the surface are threatened by depth. Those who have never descended fear those who have returned. You have returned. Not perfect, not finished, but conscious. And consciousness changes the rules. You begin to recognize others not as enemies, but as fellow travelers at different stages of the same journey. Some are asleep, some are waking, some are resisting. Their reactions are no longer commands. They are signals. This allows compassion to arise, not the soft, self-erasing kind, but the strong compassion that does not require agreement or proximity. You can wish someone well without walking beside them. You can understand someone without lowering yourself into their conflict. This is maturity. Jung believed that the goal of life was not happiness, but meaning. And meaning is born where the individual meets the truth of their own nature. If others hate you for living honestly, it is not evidence of failure. It is evidence of differentiation. But differentiation must be carried with humility. The work never ends. The shadow always remains nearby, waiting for moments of pride or fatigue. This is why the individuated person never stops reflecting, never stops listening, never stops correcting course. Not to satisfy the world, but to remain faithful to the self. And here is the final truth Jung would want you to understand. You were never meant to be understood by everyone. You were meant to be real. Reality disrupts illusions. Reality exposes compromises. Reality awakens fear in those who have built their lives around avoidance. Let them feel what they feel. You do not need to carry it. Your task is simpler and far more difficult. To live consciously. To face yourself daily. To refuse the comfort of false belonging. To walk forward without resentment. When you do this, something extraordinary happens. The hatred loses its power, not because it disappears, but because you have outgrown the need for approval that once made it dangerous. You are no longer living from the outside in. You are living from the center outward. And from that place, nothing essential can be taken from you. Thank you for listening, and until next time, take care of what is truly yours.